Why do the passions that once defined you, the very activities that painted your world with excitement, suddenly fade into irrelevance after an awakening? It is a disorienting, even frightening experience, as if a vital part of you has quietly died. Carl Jung offered a sobering insight. Awakening is not all bliss and transcendent love. It is also a process of dismantling, and one of its earliest signs is the loss of interest in what once brought you joy. This does not mean you are broken or adrift. Rather, it signals a profound shift occurring deep within the psyche. You are not crazy, and you are not alone. Jungian psychology provides a clarifying lens for this unsettling transition. By the end of this exploration, you will not only understand why your old pastimes now feel hollow, you will recognize this emptiness as evidence of growth. What feels like loss is, in truth, the quiet beginning of a more authentic life. Before awakening, our hobbies often serve the ego. They become pillars of our identity. The artist, the gamer, the musician, the athlete. In Jungian terms, these roles constitute the persona, the mask we present to the world. Hobbies provide achievement, status, a sense of belonging. They distract from inner stress and offer tangible proof of our worth. That is why they feel so potent during the ego's reign. They reinforce the story of me, but awakening fractures that mask. The old motivations lose their power. Winning the game, posting the painting, finishing the song. These no longer deliver the same satisfaction, because the part of you that craved them, the ego identity, is beginning to dissolve. This isn't a failure of will. It is a sign of spiritual and psychological maturation. What once fueled the ego no longer nourishes the soul. So what comes next? Jung revealed that awakening is, at its core, a confrontation with the self, the deeper, truer nucleus of your being. When the self begins to emerge, it reorganizes your entire inner world. Values you once held dear, winning, achieving, collecting, competing, now feel like chasing smoke. Your psychic energy has shifted its focus from the persona to the self. Before awakening, your pleasures were tied to external validation, recognition, productivity, measurable achievement. But when awakening cracks you open, through breathwork, psychedelics, inner work, or raw life experience, the outer world loses its luster. The magic evaporates from former hobbies, because at their core, they were often performances. Painting was not merely painting. It was a way to feel talented. Gaming was not just play. It was a means to feel accomplished. Shopping was not simply acquisition. It was an attempt to feel worthy. After awakening, the drive to seek validation through activity collapses. When you no longer need to be seen as the artist or the achiever, the fuel for those pursuits evaporates. This is not loss. This is liberation. Your soul is no longer satisfied with building an identity through pastimes. It is turning inward, seeking meaning beyond performance. The disorientation you feel arises because these activities were never just hobbies. They were chapters of your story. They told you who you were. When the self awakens, those old labels dissolve. The map you relied on is gone, and the new one has not yet been drawn. In that liminal space, everything can feel pointless. Yet Jung did not see this as the end of joy, but as the necessary stripping away of illusion to make room for something authentic. Your old value system, built on persona and conditioning, must fall away. What eventually emerges, though it requires patience, are soul-aligned passions, activities born not from ego, but from essence. And in between, There is a void, a silence, a strange emptiness where things that once mattered now feel hollow. That void has a purpose. Here is a raw truth. Not all hobbies were hobbies. Some were escapes. Perhaps you painted to avoid loneliness. Perhaps you gamed to silence anxiety. Perhaps you sang to feel seen. On the surface, it looked like passion. Underneath, it was an unconscious strategy to soothe pain you did not want to face. Jung called this the shadow, the hidden wounds, fears, and emotions we bury because they conflict with the self-image we wish to uphold. Awakening drags the shadow into the light. Suddenly, the hobby that once offered relief fails to perform because it was never about the activity. It was about avoiding what lay beneath. When awakening occurs, the psyche begins dismantling these distractions. It is your soul saying, "No more band-aids. It is time to face the wound." That is why you lose interest. Not because you are bored of your passions, but because those passions were masks. When the mask falls, the coping mechanism fails. This stage can feel like depression, even hopelessness. You may think, "I don't enjoy anything anymore. What is wrong with me?" But from a Jungian perspective, nothing is wrong. This is a breakthrough. For the first time, you are meeting yourself without distraction. You are no longer hiding behind constant activity. You are seeing the loneliness, the fear, the grief, the longing. It hurts, but it is also profoundly healing. By sitting with the shadow, instead of painting over it, you begin to integrate it. You learn that loneliness is not a death sentence, but a doorway to self-connection. Fear is not weakness, but a signal to be honored. Grief is not a curse, but a teacher. Losing your old escapes feels like losing yourself, but really, you are losing the veil. This phase, releasing your hobbies, facing the void, meeting your shadow, is part of what mystics call the dark night of the soul. It is not despair for its own sake, but the necessary dismantling of the illusions that once structured your life. Jung understood it as the collapse of the old psychic order. The things that gave your life meaning, your hobbies, your goals, your pleasures, fall away. It feels like a kind of death. You wake up one morning and the spark is gone. Music feels like noise. Painting feels forced. Gaming feels repetitive. Shopping feels empty. Even life itself seems stripped of color. But here is the secret. This death of meaning is not an ending. It is a sacred transition. When the old self dissolves, the psyche enters a liminal space, a threshold between who you were and who you are becoming. The hobbies belonged to the old you. They were tied to the persona. When the mask falls, they no longer fit. That is why everything feels dead. It is not because life has no meaning. It is because your old meaning system has collapsed. You cannot force yourself back into it. You cannot reattach the mask. Jung compared this process to alchemy. The psyche must undergo a nigredo, a blackening, a dissolving, before anything new can be born. The dark night is the psychological nigredo, the burning away of all that no longer serves so that new gold may emerge. As painful as it feels, this void has purpose. It strips away false motivations. It forces you to sit with silence, with emptiness, with nothing to prove and nothing to hide behind. It teaches you that you are not your hobbies. You are not your achievements. You are not the roles you have played. When everything external loses meaning, you are invited to touch something deeper, the ground of being itself. The self, as Jung named it. Not the ego that needs validation, but the deeper being. That simply is. And from that ground, new forms of meaning eventually grow. This time, they are not ego-driven. They are soul-driven. Jung called this process individuation, becoming your true, undivided self. Losing your old hobbies is not the end of creativity. It is the clearing of the field so that authentic creativity can take root. Perhaps painting returns not as a way to prove talent, but as meditation. Maybe music comes back not to show off, but to express the soul. New passions may appear, gardening, writing, walking in nature, that you never expected. These are not hobbies in the old sense. They are not escapes. They are expressions of your being. When individuation begins, your joy shifts from doing to achieve to doing to be. The activity itself becomes nourishment, not a performance. So what would Jung suggest if you find yourself in this void, grieving your lost passions? Be patient with the emptiness. Do not rush to fill it. Allow the dissolution. Do not force old hobbies back into your life. If they are meant to return, they will. In a new form, with new meaning. Experiment without expectation. Try journaling, walking in silence, or new forms of art. Let the self guide you. Observe your shadow. Ask yourself, was this hobby feeding my soul or my persona? That question alone can reframe everything. Trust the process. Individuation cannot be rushed. Something new will emerge, but only after you have released what no longer serves. If you are moving through this stage right now, remember, you are not alone. Thousands are feeling this same emptiness, the same loss of meaning. So let us continue this conversation. What passion or hobby did you lose after your awakening? And what do you sense is waiting to be born in its place? Share it below. Your words may be exactly what someone else needs to hear.